can close my camera for a while, and then I'll connect it back again. Let me make sure it's recording. All right, so yeah, recording is going. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. Special thanks for those who were able to provide me feedback. It's been fairly consistent, so it's good that although there is recognition that the content that we are going through is good. There is one area that we need to improve, and we are listening to your voice. So the next session will be a lot more geared towards one particular business case example, so that we can all follow constructing a solution using that strategy. So thank you. If you provided feedback, I'm speaking about you. I don't want to mention names because you did it anonymously, so I don't want to put you on the spot. But thank you so much for giving us feedback. It's much appreciated. Today we're gonna look at entity lists, but I want to do somewhat of a hybrid. I mean, we look at out of the box components as well as a little bit of extension using JavaScript, and I'm gonna look at one internal liquid command that kind of gives you an ability to list data based on data verge views as well. So without further ado, let's have a look at that. All right, one thing that we saw last time we connected was that Studio is a great way to get started when we are building components, but Studio is not yet up to pair with the amount of options and fields that are available in the backend when it comes to entity forms, entity lists, and whatnot. So what I did here, I created an entity list through Studio, and usually when you create it, I don't know why this is not selecting. So let's start over. Let's create a new page. So I'm going to start from blank. If this will ever load for me. All right, this is a blank page. So in order for me to add an entity list, I go to components, then I click list, and now I have an option to create new or to use existing. All right. If I create new, the amount of options here on the front end is not really complete, or the list of fields is not what you see in the back end, but you can still be dangerous, or you can still do stuff using a Studio. So I would always encourage you to use the alternative of start here, complete in Studio, or if you know exactly how your view needs to look at the form and you have experience with the backend, you can start in the backend and use existing option. All right. So let's do a quick sample here. So account sample list. It's gonna be based on the account.
I don't think
Share your
your
screen.
screen.
I'm
Yeah.
not sharing my
I
screen.
thought it was
Thank
just
you.
me. And I've just seen all the messages.
Oh man, let's start over. My bad. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's been a heck of a week. Anyhow, so let me delete this component here. So I have a blank page that I created by clicking new, and I selected the area, the column area, and from here I can click on components, and then I can click on list. From Studio though, I have an option to name my list, so I'm gonna call it sample account list, and I can select the entity that this list is going to be based off. Then I can select the view again from data verge view list for this table. Sorry, and I can select the one that I want. And then there are other few options here. If I want to enable the user to create new record, view details, edit record, delete record, view, edit, and delete will only function if you select entity permissions and you configure entity permissions to work that way. Okay. So additional settings here are whether I want to allow search for this list and if it's entity permission enabled. So we'll mark them all and click outside, maybe click in, click outside, and hope that this is gonna save. It's not showing that it's saved, as you can see, so I don't know exactly if it is. So I can type something to force the save event, but it's still not showing my options. So let's click outside and let's click in and see if it's saved. It did not, well, it did. I hate this editor, but anyhow, that's what we got. So it's indicating that it's saved. Now it pointed me to use existing. I created new, it created the record, and now it's switching to existing. You can see the list here, and we can theoretically click on browse website, and we would see our list on this particular blank page. So that is my list, a list of accounts, very simple. I can search. I can use a star here to search, and that will give me some results. Right? Now, if we go to the back end and we go to the entity lists area, you see that I have the list that I created from Studio. Now, there are multiple different options here that you don't see in Studio. We'll inspect each one as we go. So on this particular set here, what's at play is essentially you can add multiple views to your entity list, and in the front end, it would allow the user to select which ones they want to display. So maybe it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for our setup with accounts, but if you're setting up a customer service application, like a case management application, maybe you want to display, open cases, cases in progress, or completed cases, and allow the users to filter that through the front end. So in here, I'm going to clear the cache because I made an additional change there. So we can see what that looks like in the front end, having that option to display multiple views in the control. So now we have this option here that allows me to select which one we want to see. Okay. Moving on. Down here, I can configure the number of items that are to be displayed per page on the entity list on the grid. I can label details button. Suppose that I have configured function here to click to view details on a record or click to create. That's where you change the names of those fields. Now, this particular area, it kind of conflicts a little bit with the options area. The options area allows for you to add a button to create, as well as details, edit, delete, workflow, so on and so forth. But if you try to do it from here, what you're actually doing is you are setting up your grid to work with pop-up forms. When you click to create, you get a pop-up of a form, an entity form, where you can input data and then save it from there. In this general area, you can only point to a web page. Now, this works great for records that require, a form that's a full screen form, or a form that uses a web form like a wizard-like setup. So that's the scenario where you use web pages versus the entity forms, the pop-up setup. The pop-up is great because it keeps the navigation in one screen. So if you have like if you're creating an account and you only requesting the user to enter a handful of fields, I'd say do the pop-up. It's better. But if you have the wizard-like experience where you do step 1, step 2, step 3, and then finally you have to go back to the grid, I'd say use pages, because pages again will provide you enough real estate to do your whole form in one area. Okay, but this is how you change the button name for details for create. If the grid result is empty, you can add a message to indicate that there are no records. There is a default to it, but if you want to override the default, you can use it here. So search, I've enabled search from Studio, and that is this particular option. But there is another option for search as well, and we'll see that in a second. I can also set up my view to filter by a portal user attribute. Suppose that I have not flagged my grid to use entity permissions, and I wanted to filter all accounts that are directly related to me as a user. I could do it over here. Now, this is a direct filter, meaning that the data that's displayed has some sort of contact field or account field that relates to the contact record. Okay, if you have 3-hop relationship or 3 levels relationship, you would not be able to use this particular filter option. So the other option for filter, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, is this metadata filter. And this allows for you to construct an interface that somewhat more appealing to the user, especially if you are dealing with a data set that has multiple elements. Case management as one example. User may filter active cases or closed cases, so on and so forth, using the view strategy. But suppose that within the active cases result, you want to allow the users to filter by location of the case, or by whether or not it was a case related to an equipment, or if it was an HR case. I don't know what the scenario may be. If the data element exists in the particular entity that you're dealing with, you can use that data element to set up metadata filter. So in my account entity, I have used the out of the box business type field. I have customized it to have different options. Those are the options here: university and trade school. There is one for college. So I'm going to set up a particular filter bar that allows the user to select a filter based on the business type. So we are going to do that based on a pick list set. Sorry. And I'm going to select business type here. So selection mode, if we do check boxes, we are implying that the users can select different business type to be part of the filter. If we do radio buttons, they can only filter one at a time. Same for drop down list. I'll use check boxes. Display name, we're gonna still keep it business type, but you could call it whatever. Now, let me clear the cache. Reload it again, and now I have a filter. Note that I have this square here, that it's actually a button. And the reason why it's displayed in a funky way is because I have not defined a label for my metadata filter component. So I'm going to clear the cache once again and reload this. And now I have my filter. I can select it, apply. I don't have anything for community college. Okay. So far, so good. All right. So moving on the properties. So that's it for the first tab. Second tab is the map view. Now you can enable this entity list to be displayed as a map. Now, in order for that to function properly, you need to have fields on in your particular data set that translates to let and launch. Okay, I'm not going to go through the trouble of setting it up, but the setup itself, it's really easy. I mean, so long as you have a field, you're good to go. My scenario, I'm dealing with the account entity. I could select lat and launch here. The particular field that I want to show in the box for the pen that is displayed on the map. So I would assume it would be something around account name. The description field, there is a description field in accounts. Then the map type is pretty much the vendor or the technology that you're going to use to display the map. And then the rest of the stuff is configuration of the map and the creds to be used. Okay, you do that, you get your map displayed. Same for a calendar view. You can enable the grid to display in a calendar format, but you need to have specific fields to kind of drive the display of the calendar. So start date, end date, summary field, so on and so forth. And then how you want to display, if you want to do a day presentation or if you want to do it as a month. So you can get that there as well. And then the last one in terms of displaying or rendering your entity list is OData field. So you can present as an OData. And I've seen a lot of companies use that, use the portal to feed other systems. So that's a way to do it. You can expose the OData field and then whichever system or Outlook configuration you want to use, you can consume this data field and use it for your purposes. Okay. Now, moving on to options. We talked about this grid configuration and we saw a little bit about it last time we got together. And here is where you define entity forms that you want to use to display your to be associated with specific actions. So if you want to create an entity form for account to allow users to create accounts from portals, you can select that entity form here, and then you would see a create button show up on your grid. The same for details, edit, delete, workflow, and whatnot. This last four, they come in handy because sometimes you want to perform a function in portals, but you don't want to get into the trouble of setting up a web API to do the job. And what I mean by that is, suppose that you have a scenario where you want to send a notification to an account, okay, to a customer, right? Instead of writing code that actually sends the notification, what you could do is you could create a workflow that sends the notification and then allow the user to invoke that workflow from the portal. And again, this is all tied into whatever you have already set up in Dataverse's backend. So workflow, this will list all workflows that were created for the account entity. Okay. The other one is create a related record. This one, I don't think a lot of people use this, but I have used it in the past. This serves the purpose of being able to create a record that relates to the core record that you display. Think about it this way. I have my list, and I want to create a contact that will be in the end associated with this university. So instead of going through the trouble of making the user open the record and then click to create a contact, I can add functionality here that would pop open that related record form and allow me to create a contact for this company directly. Okay. Okay. Now the last two options are activate, deactivate. Very simple. Those two actions are performed in the back end, and that would be good to go. I think we have a question from David. Go ahead, David. You can unmute yourself and ask away.
Sure. Thanks very much. I just wanted to take us back a little bit. I think I might be echoing here. So.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Can you say that again?
So, no, I just wanted to take us back a little bit. You know, the all data one that you feed. I was just thinking that I think I might have heard in the past that there might be some security risk there, something like that. Can't remember exactly.
I don't know exactly what the security risk was, but there is always risk in exposing this type of information as services on the web. So, I mean, you got to be careful how you configure security. So, for example, if I were to set up all data and come back to the first tab and remove the entity permission filter, then anybody could access my page and get information about my customers. So I don't know if the security flaw was a gateway to push data back into Dataverse, or if the security flaw is exposing data to the public. If the latter is what you're referring to, yeah, it is a risk, but it's something that you can control, right? It's not something that's out there and hackers would be able to get in unless you don't properly configure your security. So I'm not sure. I mean, if you recall where you heard about it, we can look into that. Javier has a question. Can you show notes attachments in an entity list on a portal? You mean like if I have an attachment associated with an account, display that attachment, like if it's an image, for example? Is that?
Yeah, to allow portal users to download certain assets.
You could. You have to somewhat hack it. I mean, you can construct an entity list based on annotation, but you could use, I think the best way to do it is if you use that strategy we talked about last week, where you have a form. Within the form, you have a grid for annotation, and then there you expose the information that you need to expose. You can do it that way. You can, if you're dealing with an image, you can most likely construct functionality for users to click to view the attachment. But it's hard to use out-of-the-box components to display an image in the context of an entity list. Like you have an image in an annotation and you want to render that image as part of the result set. And reason being is because when you construct a grid in Dynamics, remember that the basis of an entity list is a view in Dynamics. And in a view, for annotation, we cannot present the document body, that particular column, which is a base string 65 representation of the file. You don't surface that particular value on a grid, right? So what you could do, and maybe it's an example for the next class, is you can build a service that uses Liquid to query the document body of a particular record, annotation record, and on the grid, as you loop through each line, you send a request to read the document body of that notes record. Then with the string, you can then present it to the user on the screen. You can inject it back on the screen. Okay, little complex. Maybe we will extend it more, but natively you can't really present the file. So you have to do a little bit of customization to either add a link for the user to click and view the file, or use that strategy of reading the document body elsewhere and injecting it into the grid itself.
Right.
All right. So yeah, so you can configure these actions based on entity forms and then display to the user. You can also add actions to an existing web page or an external URL. Okay, so you have that flexibility here. Remember, if you use entity form, the data will always be present, or the form will always be present as a pop-up. If you do web page here, the navigation will be forward to your web page. All right, you do have this fun option here, which is to bind JavaScript to your entity view. And I have an example that I've built, and if you watched some of my training before, you're probably familiar with this example. So let's have a look at that. In this example, what we are doing is we wait for the grid to load, then we are going to iterate through each line, and as we do, I'm going to check the value of a particular column, and I'm going to inject a icon to better visually represent the data. Okay. So here is the script. I'm going to throw that in there. And before we dissect the script, I wanted to mention or to point out a few components that I do use in my script. Okay, Portal is wired to use glyph icon, which is a font that presents characters that look like icons. Okay, so it's really lightweight, and it's embedded in Bootstrap. So the reference that you see in the script to glyph icon are references that exist in this particular documentation here for Bootstrap 3. So those are the icons that we use or can use. Okay, back to the script. What we do here is we are waiting for, or we have subscribed to this event loaded. So when this particular div is marked or flagged that's completely loaded, we go through each, we go through the children of this div called viewGrid, and then we're gonna iterate through each column or record called business type code. So each TR, each line, and then we step through each column that has this particular data attribute, and then we decide what to do. So I read the HTML value of the column within the row. Then I check, is it a community college? If it is a community college, whatever was there in the HTML replace with another div and an icon, with an icon and description. So we do that for university, we do that for trade school. Okay, so I'm going to save and show the end result. Now I have an icon for each specific business type. Now, this is a very simple example, but the example in itself is somewhat powerful. I mean, for JavaScript developers in this call, you'll be like, yeah, Victor, this is what I do every day. But my point is, to the question that Javier just asked a few minutes ago, suppose that I'm dealing with an annotation grid here. And what I want to do is, on each line, I want to reach out to a web service, fetch the data that I need, and then come back and inject that data here. That's all you need to do. I mean, you still need to construct your web service to give the information back that you want, but you have a handle to each line in the grid to a specific attribute to come and retrieve information and then inject information as you wish. Okay? Now, you may ask, Victor, how do you know this stuff here? How do you know that this even exists? So you can always go back to your grid, and then you can start inspecting areas of this particular table to give you the information that you are after. So what you see with entity lists is that when you look at the row, the TR object of this table, you have access to the data ID. That's the ID of the record. Then you know, based on the data entity, which entity this is reading off of. And then you can go to each TD, sorry, and then you can know which attribute we are looking at. So you can use that in your logic and complete whatever requirement you have to implement. But you have enough information here to be dangerous, if you will. You have enough information to go out and build your interface using this functionality. Again, the strategy I use all the time is use as much out of the box functionality as you can, and then come back here and look for ways to add on depending on your business requirements. And again, I mean, I could have constructed this grid by hand using HTML and JavaScript, but then, excuse me, all of this stuff, view details, edit, create, all of this stuff, I would have to build as well. The pop-up features, when you save a pop-up, the grid has to refresh, but it has to maintain whatever page it was on. All of this stuff is given to me. I don't have to redo it, but I concentrate on what I have to instead of trying to rebuild the whole thing by hand. All right. Any questions so far? No. Okay, moving on. So another component that I want to show you is actually a liquid command called entity view. The entity view is different from an entity list. Think about an entity list as a bundle of functionality that has to do with a data verge view, okay, a CDS view or Dynamics view, whatever way you want to call it, but it has a lot of extra functionality. I can add a create option, I can do an edit option, I can set up my view to display as a map, I can do all sorts of things within the context of the entity view, or entity list, I'm sorry. An entity view allows you to have access to a set of data based on a view in data verge, but it doesn't have all the extra functionality. But it allows you to display a set of data on the screen or even on a web service that's based on a data verge view. Okay. Now, for those who are familiar with Liquid, for those who have done Liquid fetch to get data from data verge, the data view strategy serves the purpose of you're building a product, the product has a particular filter for an entity, but you know that users, business users or citizen developers will eventually change that set of data. And you don't want the users, this particular user, should go into a web template and make that change on a fetch query because they may not have the knowledge to do that. But you know that they would be comfortable in going to a view in Dynamics or CDS or data versions backend and change the filter of that particular view. Think about it this way. You want to display a grid on your main page that is a list of suppliers for hats, right? So somebody goes to CDS, they have a filter for that particular business type, they create a view. All you have to do is come back to the portal and say, I want to present a table result, HTML table result based on this view. Not necessarily based on a query that I build as a developer. Okay, so let's look at that sample. I know it might be a new concept for you, but let's look at that. I think it will make sense in the end. So I'm going to swap to another environment real quick here and to another portal. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the example is here on this liquid tags. And I'm going to, selected the wrong one. I'm going to open the particular web template for us to inspect. Close a bunch of this stuff off. And this as well. So on this liquid tag, I want to open the content. Come on. Okay. Web templates. Liquid. Open this web template. While it's loading, I'm going to sign in here. And we will look into this particular example. And scroll down. All right, so this is my table, okay? In this particular example, we are using fetch to get the data that we need, and then we are constructing the result set down here. So far, so good? Now, on this other example here, I am invoking or loading an entity list of name account list. And note this object here, entity view. What it does, it gives me a handle into the result set so that I can then construct my table in the way that I want. Okay? I don't have any features related to click to open, click to edit. I have a handle onto the data behind this list, but I'm not exposing any features of an entity list here because I'm connected to the data verge view. So far, so good. Now, notice that I started by referring to an entity list and then looking at the result set or the data set for that entity list and then presenting some results by accessing the property of the entity view. In this example down below, you will note that I don't even refer to the entity list object. I'm going straight to data versions backend and say, here's the logical name for my entity. And here's the name of the view in the backend that I want to use. And again, I have access to total number of records in this particular result set. I have I'm doing another filter here, which is not really the context of what we are talking about, but it's just a way to present it differently. But I want you to think about this object itself. I mean, I have not done any fetch XML here to get the data. I'm just giving the name of the entity and the name of the view. So whatever filter in DataVerge that is applied to this view in DataVerge, that filter is used to get the data, plus whatever I have configured with entity permissions. Okay, Javier has a question. Is it then a common practice to provide key or business users with a model-driven app to manage the content? Yeah, I think it makes sense. If you are, so the way I look at this, Javier, is that although I'm a consultant and I get paid by the number of hours that customers reach out to me to make a change, I don't think it's fair for me as a consultant to make the customer a hostage of my services. So whatever I can do to give power to the customer to make those small changes by themselves, I do it. And even if the customer doesn't have the team to do that, I do it anyway, because if I have to do it to make that change, it's easier for me to log in and say, okay, let me just fix this view and add another filter because the customer said so, instead of having to go to the Liquid template and make those changes manually. I prefer to do it that way. Now, there is a trade-off. If you do fetch, you can be a lot more artistic in the way that you compose your fetch. I mean, you can use the query string to filter your fetch. You can use other things to compose that particular filter. If you need to provide added-on functionality, for example, a form to create record, a form to edit record, then there is no way out. You have to use entity lists. Okay. Now, if it is a side menu bar that will list all companies that this particular customer interact with, and they want to click on that customer and have all the functionality pop up, and that list is somewhat dynamic, but the filter or the data source for that list or the setup for that data source is somewhat static, I would use entity view for sure. Okay. Any additional questions? Mark, go for it.
Yeah, hi, Victor.
Hello.
I was wondering for all the forms that you create and use, do you usually and deselect them in the model-driven app and show to the users?
Sorry, you broke up a bit. Can you repeat the question, please?
It's a little bit hard. I hear my voice in the background. What I was saying is that for the forms and the views that you create for the portal, you probably don't want them in some case to show for your Dynamics 365 users.
Mm-hmm.
So do you go in your model-driven apps and deselect those views and forms so they don't appear in the model-driven apps?
Yeah, that's what I do, and usually I name my forms in views to indicate that they belong to portals.
Okay.
That way, all the devs, they are mindful of that as well. They don't add it to any other model-driven app.
Okay. Thanks, Victor.
Thank you. Now, there is another object called entity form. I believe, I mean, it's a little fuzzy in my head, but the same strategy that you have here for entity view, and then you can call the entity and the name of the view. You can do it for forms. I mean, I'll ping that one later. I forgot. Yeah, I think it's called entity form. The difference is, and we have to have this clear for us. Note that this is a liquid command, if you will. Whereas if you are using the entity list object, I think there is a command that's specific to it. So I'm sorry, I should have looked that up and given that to you, but I will. I'll post it later on. But essentially, all I'm saying is there are 4 specific liquid commands. 2 of them will refer to entity forms and entity list records. So you're saying, I want to load this entity form, or I want to load this entity list, and then you give the name, right? These other commands here, entity view, and then there is another one I can't remember now. You are telling the portal to go to Dataverse's backend and load it based on components of the Dataverse. On the two initial ones, you are telling portals to look for those references as records in those two entities, not necessarily the objects in the backend as you are doing here. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. I'll post this one later, and again, I apologize. It turns out that I'm not only losing my hair, I'm losing my memory too. So we'll do it. We'll post, and then yeah, I think that's all I have for today. Next week is our last one, so my goal is to quickly go through liquid commands, the ones that I use the most in setting up portals. Then the deployment strategies for portals, and what else? Whatever else we wanted to talk about, and maybe talk about the next session on this Zero to Hero program. Does anybody else have questions?
Yeah.
Probably afterwards. I never get hands on until the weekend after we've looked at something, and that's yeah. I'll try and think of write the questions down and ask them next week.
Okay. Yeah, you can always post here on Teams, and I'll try to respond. And then if anybody else that has exposure to portals wants to respond, I mean, feel free. Go for it, Javier.
Yeah, so I don't want to get ahead of things because next week you're gonna talk about deployment and stuff like that. But is there any common way of doing performance testing on the portal? Because we are doing it now, but we don't know if it's a correct way. Okay, it works, but there wasn't really a lot to find on the internet with regards to performance testing.
Yeah, I have not seen anything that's official from Microsoft. I mean, I've seen people use Selenium for stress tests, but the idea is you write a test that would be your automated test, and then you crank up the number of requests to see if your portal will support it. But other than that, I have not seen anything official. I can ask around. There are a few other guys that I think we can ask. There's one guy from New Zealand that does quite a bit of DevOps in portals. I'll post his name and maybe even ask him directly if he has any guidelines, but I have not seen anything from Microsoft officially.
Yeah. Well, we're using Apache JMeter now, and it works. It does what it's supposed to do, but there wasn't indeed, like you mentioned, not really anything common found.
Yeah.
And second question I have, but again, maybe you're gonna talk about it next week.
Go ahead, no, it's okay.
We have set up automated deployment for the portal, but we still have a manual step, which is the restart of the portal. Is there any way to automate a restart?
You wanna what is the last step that's manual? Sorry.
Is there any way to automate a restart of a portal?
Oh, the restart. There is one post from Colly Vermande that talks about that. I think there is it's part of the API for portals to manually trigger a restart. Again, let me take note of that. I believe I saw that in the past. I haven't done it, but I saw somebody do it.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe you present next week on what you have used for DevOps.
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna have to ask around because I didn't set it up myself.
There you go.
But I did do the performance testing.
Yeah, the strategy that we're gonna look at next week is we're gonna go from like manual to automated, and the reason why I go the manual steps first is because a lot of us, the projects that we are dealing with, they can't really fund automated deployment. So
Yeah.
we're gonna look at the manual, the tools that are available out there, and then move on to more of the automated stuff, at least conceptually.
Yeah. Great.
And then I shouldn't spill the beans, but now that you're talking about it, so our plan for the next session is to bring other folks to present. So we have a hand full of people who are experts in portals to present. So folks who know DevOps inside out, folks who have done a lot of the web API stuff, some other people who are really experts on CSS, make portal look different. So we're gonna bring them in, and they actually gonna do each lesson. So it's supposed to be really advanced portals programming. And again, we have to organize in such a way that we create an idea or a business case, and then we advance each week to the construction of that application. But that is the plan for the next session. So we'll be posting more information as we get closer to it. Yeah.
Sounds
All right.
great.
So that's all I have for the day. Again, I will post a few links here. The first one will be those 4 commands, liquid commands for referencing forms and views. Then the name of that person, Javier, that does DevOps, and maybe he'll be able to give us some information on testing as well. And then the last link I will post is that the feedback link for this program. So if you can provide us information about how we are doing, if you like it, if you don't like it, what we can get better, that would be great. Okay. Is there anybody else asking questions? Pablo, I think you wanted to ask a question. Go for it.
Yeah, Victor. Hi, Victor.
Hello.
I have a question for you. It's about entity form. I couldn't watch the last lesson that you gave last week, and it is about the attachment file. I was able to put the field of the attachment file in my Power Portal, but
Mm-hmm.
I have a problem to get it in my data, in my table data. I can't access it, and I have contacted the Microsoft, and they couldn't know how to solve the problem as well.
Okay.
And I don't know if you can help me through this.
Let's have a look at that. Let me stop the recording, and
Okay.